Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12s. This is Corbin Smith, your host for Locked On Seahawks. Joining me for our Blue Friday show, my co-host Nick Lee. Feels like it's been a few weeks since the two of us have been able to do a show together, but I know this is the show that you and I get so excited about each week during the regular season because it's all about game plan. Seahawks and Titans getting ready to play in week 2, the first game at Lumen Field, first regular season game at Lumen Field with fans since 2019. Couldn't be more fired up about the 12s coming back to the stadium and getting a chance to have the normal environment we're used to seeing in Seattle.
Yeah, I can hardly wait. That just killed me last year, watching an empty Lumen CenturyLink Field. And it just didn't feel right. And college football too. It's just, football is one of those sports, baseball, after a while, I kind of forgot about the fans not being there. NBA a little bit too, but man, football, there's just something different about the fans, whether it's college or NFL, and especially in Seattle. Seattle knows how to bring it, and I think the Titans are in for a reminder on what the 12s in Seattle are capable of, and I'm so excited to watch that unfold.
Let the chaos commence. Looking for the pandemonium, what teams normally worry about when they come to Seattle. They didn't have to worry about it last year. That is not going to be the case in 2021. So really looking forward to that first home game of the regular season coming up on Sunday. We're going to be breaking down some keys to victory, doing a bit of game planning, and dishing out our picks to click. Jam-packed episode coming your way, so let's get rolling. The Locked On NFL Draft Podcast relaunches September 20th with brand new hosts. Eric Crocker brings the player scouting. Ryan Tracy brings the analytics. Follow the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast on YouTube, the Odyssey app, or wherever you get podcasts. Now for your lead story here on Locked On Seahawks. I was thinking about this today, getting ready to interview Russell Wilson's weekly press conference and thinking about just how crazy it is now that we are 10 years into his NFL career. It has been 10 years since Pete Carroll and John Schneider made the bold move, a move that a lot of experts and fans were against at the time, deciding to start Russell Wilson in week 1 as a rookie, as a third-round pick out of Wisconsin over Matt Flynn, a player they paid or gave a 3-year, $26 million contract to in free agency. And yet, here we are. You fast forward to the 2021 season. We just saw Wilson have a fantastic season opener with 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. He's 19th on the all-time passing touchdowns list. He's got a chance to pass Joe Montana this week with 3 touchdown passes. He moves into the 18th spot with 4 touchdowns. He ties Vinny Testaverde. So he is climbing up that touchdown list very quickly. But maybe the most notable milestone that he has a chance to accomplish this week, it doesn't just paint to the consistency and excellence of Russell Wilson, but of Pete Carroll and the entire Seahawks organization. Nick, he has a chance on Sunday to become the 3rd fastest player in NFL history to 100 wins. He only has 45 regular season losses in his career. He lost his first start against the Cardinals, a game that Pete Carroll is still pretty upset they didn't find a way to win all those years ago. But he hasn't tasted defeat very much since that point. So they got to like their odds that they could notch number 100 this week, and he can join Tom Brady and Joe Montana in that very select group.
Remember when people thought that he won the Super Bowl because he had a really good run game and a really good defense? Or that was the only reason why he was good? I think if anyone still thinks that way, they do not know football. And I don't value their opinion, to be honest, because it is clear as day that Russell Wilson is one of the better quarterbacks, certainly of this generation, but becoming one of the better quarterbacks of all time. And you just mentioned the company he's in. You're talking Tom Brady and Joe Montana, literally the 2 best quarterbacks of all time, pretty much. And Russell Wilson, especially if he wins this Sunday and gets to that century mark, will be in that similar company. I mean, there's no better company in the NFL for a quarterback than Tom Brady and Joe Montana. There just is not. And some of the other statistical milestones you mentioned that he's getting close to, I mean, it's just amazing to go from where he started. I mean, there's a friggin' Eminem. Eminem mentions him in a rap based on, just where he came from. And that was, 4 or 5 years ago. Now he's done a lot more since that rap song came out, Monster with Rihanna, if you're curious. But he's come from a 3rd round pick to one of the better ones of all time. And, that's Tom Brady came from a much later round, but it's amazing that those guys come from that and become what they are. And Russell Wilson is one of the more consistent, reliable, not just quarterbacks, athletes in sports. I'm talking any sport, at least in American sports that I know of. There are not very many athletes, much less football players, who have gone a decade in their sport at the top of their game without missing a game. That is incredible. I don't care what sport you play. Russell Wilson deserves to be put on that pedestal that now he's starting to join.
We've talked about it time and time again, Nick, and I know that there are fans that root for non-Seahawks, the other 31 teams that maybe don't understand what kind of company that Russell Wilson is really in. But I think at this point, at the age of 32, going to be 33 in November, I think he already has built a pretty darn solid Hall of Fame resume. You add this 100th win here and become the 3rd fastest to accomplish that with Brady and Montana. You add in the fact that he's been in the playoffs all but 1 year. He's been in the league. They make it back to the postseason again. I mean, if he was able to lead this team on another deep playoff run, I know that's what number 3 wants. That's what Pete Carroll wants. They want to go deep in the postseason and threaten for another Super Bowl. If they are able to do that, and he's able to add that onto his resume, the fact that he is going to be in the top 15 for passing touchdowns in the very near future. He's got a number of other records that are already to his name, both with the franchise and in the league. When you consider all of those things, and again, he's only 32 going on 33. He wants to play till he's 45. He's looking at what Tom Brady's doing, and he's thinking, why not me? I know everybody doubted that I was going to be a starting NFL quarterback. They shouldn't be doubting me that I can play into my mid-40s, as great of shape as he keeps himself in, the things that he does to maintain his body. We'll see how long he ends up playing in the NFL, but there's a chance that Russell Wilson's got, another 10 to 12 years in the NFL, and he already has a borderline Hall of Fame career. In fact, I think borderline might not even be the right word. I think he is just on the cusp of being in Canton. Another really strong season, getting some of these other milestones might just check off enough boxes where we know that he is going to have a bust in Canton someday.
You might say he's on the 2-yard line of a Hall of Fame career. I know. Sorry, guys. I know that was mean. But I feel very confident in that 2-yard line result will be much different than the other one, because he's got so much football ahead, like you mentioned. And even, heaven forbid, later on in his career, he's not a Seahawk anymore. What he's done for this town, for the city, for the community, just outside of football. He won the Walter Payton Award. What else do you want? That is the pinnacle of good guy in sports in the NFL. And just all the stuff he's done on and off the field culminates to him, building a very strong Hall of Fame candidacy. And I do not expect him to be slowing down. You saw that on Sunday against the Colts. He's not slowing down anytime soon. And I would argue he has maybe the best weapons and best support system he's ever had in Seattle. It's looking that way. And so I don't expect him to slow down at all. If not, maybe even get better.
Before we head on to the second quarter real quick, I want to wish from the entire Locked On Seahawks podcast our condolences to family and friends of Trevor Moad, who was Russell Wilson's mental coach, also was what Wilson coined his best friend. The two of them have known each other since Wilson started working at the IMG Academy in the pre-draft process before the Seahawks picked him. The two of them were extremely close, and unfortunately, Trevor passed away yesterday after a 2-year battle with cancer. Again, our thoughts and prayers with Trevor's family and friends. He's certainly going to be missed, made an impact on a number of people's lives, not just Russell Wilson in the sports and non-sports sector, outstanding human being. And again, he's going to be missed. When we come back in the second quarter, we are going to be looking at our game plan for Sunday's matchup, Seahawks versus Titans at Lumen Field. Going to look at offense and defense for the Seahawks, how they can move to 2-0 this weekend. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Did you know that Built Bar has 9 delicious flavors, plus the occasional limited time flavor? When you talk to a Built Bar fan like myself, we are definitely passionate about our favorite flavors. My family would say that I talk about them too much. Think about some of the amazing flavors that Built Bar has to offer. Cherry, raspberry, mint brownie, my personal favorite, peanut butter brownie, double chocolate, salted caramel. I'm getting hungry just reading through these flavor listings here. If you haven't tried all the flavors, you can get a mixed box where you'll get 2 of each of the 9 flavors. Most of the flavors have 17 grams of protein, only 130 calories, only 4 grams of sugar, and only 4 grams net carbs. 9 amazing flavors, all tasty and all healthy. Go to BuiltBar.com and use the promo code LOCK15. You'll get 15% off your first order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 50% off at BuiltBar.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Blue Friday edition. This is your host, Corbin Smith, joined as always by Nick Lee. This is actually the first time in the regular season this year that you and I get to do our normal Friday episode. Last week, I left you all on your lonesome to try to do this by yourself. But the two of us are now going to be breaking down our keys to victory, some game planning for the Seahawks on both sides of the football. And I've heard a number of reporters ask these types of questions the last 2 days of coaches and players on the Seahawks roster. And I think you and I would both agree the Tennessee Titans are not the team that they looked like last week against the Arizona Cardinals. This is a much more talented football team than they showed in that season opener on both sides of the football, particularly on offense. So the Seahawks are going to have to deal with a team that won 11 games a year ago. 2 years ago, they were a surprise contender in the AFC Championship game. They had the Chiefs on the ropes early and then weren't able to sustain it. But this is a really well-coached football team with a lot of talent. And so Seattle's not going to be able to just coast into this game based on what happened last weekend. The Titans are going to come out. They're going to be ready to play. So without further ado, let's talk some keys to victory, some game planning strategies for the Seahawks. Nick, let's start on the offensive side of the football. What do you think is one of the biggest keys for this Seahawks squad to improve to 2-0 and beat the Titans from an offensive perspective?
Well, it's something similar that they did in the Colts game. I think that they need to have an emphasis on the man beaters in the passing game. The Titans have historically been a man coverage heavy team under Mike Vrabel, and last year they struggled, especially in week 1. I mean, you saw that ridiculous pass that Kyler Murray nailed into the end zone against the Titans. And I said, hey, that kind of looks like something Russell Wilson do. And you know what? He absolutely can in that scenario. So something that can beat him down the middle, take shots down the field, but not just that, but those mesh concepts, those things that can really trick up a man coverage team. And boy, did the Seahawks ever have weapons that they could do that with. The Cardinals, I think, actually match up really well with the Seahawks in that way. They have some very, very talented receivers, and I think the Seahawks are right there with them in the amount of weapons they have. And I think the Seahawks can do similar things. Now, like you mentioned, if the Seahawks fans are rolling into this thing thinking the Seahawks are going to win 38-13, they're going to be sorely disappointed because the Titans are going to come in here pissed off. And a team that's licking their wounds, and a wounded animal is a very dangerous animal. And so even though there are going to be things like, man coverage, especially with Russell Wilson, he knows how to expose those way better than Kyler Murray does. And Shane Waldron knows how to do that too. I just don't expect everything to be wide open like it kind of was with the Cardinals. But there are certainly some areas where the Seahawks can take advantage, and that includes the man coverage for Tennessee.
And I'm going to feed off of what you just said there. And I mentioned this briefly yesterday on our crossover episode with Locked On Titans, that to me, patience is going to be key for this passing game. And it's very similar to last week. And this has been an emphasized point all offseason going into the start of the regular season. Tyler Lockett has been the chairman of talking about taking what the defense gives to you. You don't want to come out and just instantly start thinking, we're just going to start taking our shots. Let's go downfield. You let those situations come to you. You set them up. This is a secondary for the Titans that can be exploited in that regard. But They are going to be upset after what happened last week. The secondary was not happy with how they played, the yardage, the touchdowns they gave up to the Cardinals. So they're going to come out with chips on their shoulder. And so I wouldn't be thinking that you're just going to come out and be able to just hit several home runs against this defense downfield. Ultimately, the Seahawks are going to want those shot plays, but you've got to be patient with it. And I think the Seahawks will be that with Shane Waldron as the offensive coordinator. He is going to set up those opportunities using the balanced offense that they've got here and using their tight ends. I think the tight ends are going to be a big part of the game plan pretty much every week because this is a Sean McVay style offense. And we know McVay likes feeding tight ends. We could already tell last week that Shane Waldron is going to want the tight ends to be involved in the passing game as well. So it's short to intermediate game creating after the catch some, force the secondary players to take those threats seriously on those short to intermediate routes. That creates those opportunities where your speedsters like Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, they can get downfield and win vertically. You know, Russell Wilson's dangerous with those type of passes, but set up those opportunities. Don't just expect that they are going to be there. Again, I think Shane Waldron's smart enough to realize that, and maybe they'll have a shot play early that becomes available to them. But I think this is going to be one of those instances you've got a defense that's well coached. Mike Vrabel being the head coach has got his hands on the defense. I feel like they're going to have to set up those shots downfield, that they're not necessarily going to be there right off the bat. They're going to have to do some things to work towards those.
And on the flip side, in the run game, another key that we're going to go back to, the 2014, 2015 days here with Seahawks mentality, and it's test the edges in the run game. And with Chris Carson, of course, who's coming off one of his better games in a long time, and also involving Russell Wilson in the pass game, in the run game. Maybe he flirts with moving up the all-time rushing record list for the Seahawks. But this is a game where the ends, there's some injuries there for the Tennessee Titans, and this is a game where if you test them in the run game, you can maybe wiggle loose and explode for some big run plays and involve Russell Wilson. You don't need to bludgeon him, but at least make that threat. Russell Wilson's a threat to run. Make that a reality. And I know Kyler Murray, at this point in Russell Wilson's career, Kyler Murray is certainly much shiftier and much quicker on his feet and lighter on his feet and a bit more of a true runner than Russell Wilson is. But Russell Wilson's become smart, but boy, is he still athletic. So I think that they really need to take advantage of that and maybe even game plan a little bit of Russell Wilson tucking the ball and running a little bit. I think Russell Wilson also would like, and that would bring a smile to his face, but stretch out that defense, because that also is something else that could set up the pass game, especially something downfield, is to test the defense's edges in the run game.
And I think that's where the bootleg game is going to come into play, particularly if somebody like Bud Dupree can't play in this game. Dupree's dealing with a knee injury right now. One of the free agent defensive ends that the Titans brought in hoping would upgrade their pass rush. If they don't have him, and then on the other side, they're dealing with some injuries to their other defensive ends as well. They've got some issues there. They're banged up. You get that bootleg game going a little bit against a team that likes to run man coverage. You could have some receivers come open on the backside, and we've seen Russell Wilson hit some of those before downfield with the arm strength that he possesses. So I do think that is something to keep a close eye on. This is a secondary that last year was 28th in EPA against the pass in man coverage, and that's primarily what they ran. Cover one was their most prominent coverage that they were in, having one deep safety and zone and man underneath. So the Seahawks are going to be looking to exploit that. It's been an area that really they haven't done well with their own strength, their perceived strength on defense. The Titans haven't. Now let's look at the Seahawks when they are on defense. A little bit different situation here. You and I both know who the king on offense is for the Tennessee Titans. They are going to be giving the ball to King Henry, the two-time defending rushing champion, a player that I think is on a Hall of Fame track, especially when you consider the era that he's playing in where teams aren't emphasizing the run game as much. He's an absolute load to bring down. We've talked about this all week. Priority 1, 2, 3, 22. The priority has got to be taking care of Derrick Henry. You've got a gang tackle. You can't let him get downhill and break tackles, because once he does that, he's an absolute load to stop at the second, third level. He's got the gear to be able to hit home runs as well. Had a rough first game against the Cardinals, but maybe that doesn't bode well for the Seahawks, because that means he's due. One of the most consistent, one of the most productive runners in the NFL. they got to be able to slow them down. But I don't know about you. I also think this is a game where we can see the Titans, based on the way they played last week, emphasizing more passing on early downs to try to avoid a situation like they had last week where they fell behind big and then they couldn't feed the ball to Derrick Henry.
Yeah, the Derrick Henry having a bad game coming into this. That's like the next team that faces Vlad Jr. after he goes 0 for 4. Like, oh, crap. He's due. He's going to go 3 for 4, 2 home runs. And that's kind of how I feel. There's no way that Derrick Henry is going to have a second game towards the bottom of his career as he did last week. There's just no way. He is the best running back of this era, and at least in the league right now. And I know it's easier said than done because any team that has faced the Titans the last couple of years, they have just pounded the table saying, shut down Henry, and Ryan Tannehill doesn't scare you. That is way easier said than done, but here I am going to say, shut down Henry. Ryan Tannehill doesn't scare me. and even he's a talented quarterback, but he's another one of those guys who, you give him time, you give him some, especially when the run game is humming. A lot of the good decent quarterbacks in the NFL are going to succeed under those elements. But if you shut down Henry like the Cardinals did, you saw what that team can turn into. And I'm not saying that they're going to hold him to 13 points. I'm not saying that you're going to hold Derrick Henry to whatever he got, like 659 yards or something. I don't expect that to happen. But at least make them think about, okay, the run game is not quite working. Maybe we need to, like you said, maybe over adjust and start passing when they shouldn't. And because if the Titans win this game, in my opinion, it's not going to be because of Ryan Tannehill. It's going to be because they cannot stop Derrick Henry.
It's so weird saying that because know that A.J. Brown and Julio Jones on the outside are stud receivers. And the Seahawks cornerback situation, we have talked about it all offseason, into training camp, into week 1, the uncertainty about that group. Do the Seahawks have the right guys starting? Are they going to be able to withstand having mediocre starters potentially? I mean, there have been so many question marks at that position. And so I want to make it clear that I look at their offense and the receivers they've got, and I'm not downplaying the ability of those two. And Ryan Tannehill's been really good the last 2 years. But I tend to agree with you. This does feel like a game where I'm not letting King Henry do his work. If they beat me a few times in the passing game, so be it. But I am not letting them physically impose their will on me and get number 22 going, because if they do, that is bad news bears. They get a couple long touchdown drives that are anchored by Henry running the ball well, and you can find yourself in a world of hurt trying to come back in the game. And they can shorten games very quickly doing that. And so I think stopping Henry has to be priority 1 through about priority 90. I mean, you got to take care of him. He's going to have some success because he's a very talented football player, but you've got to limit what he can do so that he doesn't take over the game, because he has shown time and time again he's capable of doing that. One last thing that I want to mention looking at the defense, it's really interesting. Ryan Tannehill last year, according to Pro Football Focus, had a 43% completion rate when pressured. He was near the bottom of the league for qualified passers in that regard. However, he had 14 touchdowns and only 2 interceptions when teams brought 5 or more defenders. So he was one of the most effective quarterbacks in the league against blitzes. So this feels like a game. We saw Taylor Lewan last week really struggle with Chandler Jones, who had 5 sacks. That offensive line in general did not play well. They're going to be coming to town lacking in confidence a little bit with the way they played last week. This feels like another game where if the Seahawks can do what they did last week and get a lot of pressure with their front 4, not bringing additional rushers, they only blitzed 11 times total last week. If they're able to do that and get pressure on Ryan Tannehill, he is still a quarterback that you can force into making mistakes and potentially turn over the football, but blitz with caution, because he's been very good when he has that extra defender coming, and it's easier for him to get the football to his receivers, all the weapons that he's got on the outside.
Another thing with it's the law of averages. I think with Taylor Lewan, I don't think he's the worst tackle in football, which is what happens when you give up 5 sacks. you become the worst tackle in football. I don't think that's the real Taylor Lewan. I think that he's gonna bounce back from that, but I am still expecting this defensive line to do well and to do what they did in Indianapolis, and that is feast. I'm expecting them to feast, maybe not so much to near record-breaking pace that Chandler Jones had for Arizona.
Yeah.
But I think there's something there. It's one of those where there's smoke, there's fire. I'm not expecting this crazy game, but there's something there that got exposed by Tennessee. And yeah, pressuring Tannehill, and that comes with taking advantage of an offensive line that is licking their wounds. And on the flip side, Seattle's defensive line should be extremely confident.
Yeah, players like Darrell Taylor, Benson Mayoa, Carlos Dunlap, Alton Robinson, Rasheem Green, all those guys had good first games for the Seahawks, played well in the season opener. If those guys all bring it again this weekend, that's going to bode well for the Seahawks' chances, given the fact the Titans have had some turnover on the offensive line, and Luan is coming back from ACL. That might be part of the reason that he is struggling right now. Take advantage of it playing against them early in the season. See if you can get consistent pressure on Ryan Tannehill and force him into mistakes. When we come back in the third quarter, it's time for our weekly picks to click. Nick and I are going to be dishing out one player on offense and one player on defense that we are expecting a big game from for the Seahawks on Sunday. And I just got my prediction yesterday. We're going to have Nick give his game prediction heading towards Sunday's matchup at Lumen Field. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're back and better than ever. All eyes are on the gridiron as teams are back in action to start another football season. And as always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. With a new updated site and interface, more odds, props, and contests, betonline.ag continues to be the top source for everything football. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your welcome bonus of 100%. That's double your initial deposit just for signing up. Don't forget to use the promo code NFL100 from football, basketball, boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for this upcoming season. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Blue Friday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith, joined by Nick Lee. We're only a few days away from the Seahawks and Titans doing battle at Lumen Field, the first regular season game with the 12s back in attendance since the 2019 season. The players have been talking about it all week. Pete Carroll was talking about it on Wednesday, how fired up they are to have the fans back in the stands. Let's talk picks to click here, Nick. And you had a very good week in this regard last week. Both of your picks to click had really monster games. So we're going to have to see if that carries over here into week 2. Let's start on offense. Who is your Seahawks pick to click on offense this week against the Titans?
Well, the top 3 corners for last week, as far as snaps goes, are 6 feet, 5'10", and 5'10" in height. And last time I checked, DK Metcalf is 6'4". So first, I like that matchup. I'm going to go DK Metcalf. I'm going to go the other receiver now. I did well with Tyler Lockett last week. And this week, I think they might be maybe keying a bit too much on Lockett now that they saw that embarrassment that the Colts got embarrassed by Tyler Lockett on several occasions. And I think that they're going to make sure that doesn't happen again. But lo and behold, the beauty about having 2 is DK Metcalf will then rise and have his best game of the year. Not that he didn't have a good game. It's just he was a bit quiet for the most part in the first half, and then he got it going late and had a pretty solid game in the end. Yeah, 60 yards and a score there. I think this game he exceeds that. I'm not going to say 200 yards or anything. I'm going to go with a solid 100. I think that he's going to get a good solid 100 and another touchdown here, just for the fact that they're going to be keying so much on Tyler Lockett. And I just like the matchup. I think he's first of all, not really anyone matches up well with DK Metcalf in the whole league, but especially with the Titans. I think DK Metcalf, there's something there for him.
I'm going to stay the skill positions, but I'm going with a tight end, and I'm just buying on Gerald Everett. I just absolutely loved what I saw Shane Waldron doing with him last week in that game against Indianapolis. He scored his first touchdown on a slant, which, by the way, Tyler Lockett was wide open on the other side of the field. Lockett could have had 3 touchdowns in this game, but Seattle will take the Wilson to Everett connection for 6 points anyway. But you saw Shane Waldron dial up a couple of quick screens. One of them got called back from an illegal formation penalty, but you saw the broken tackles, the ability to create after the catch. And maybe what excites me the most is just the invaluable flexibility that Gerald Everett gives you from a formational standpoint. I mean, aside from playing quarterback and offensive line, I think he played every other position for the Seahawks last week. He lined up in the slot. He lined up as an inline tight end. He lined up out wide as a receiver. He lined up in the backfield a couple of plays. I mean, he might have been the water boy on the side. He did everything for the Seahawks. Had a couple of nice blocks. One of them sprung D. Eskridge on a jet sweep for 13 yards. So I was just really fired up by what I saw. And I think this is a Titans defense. Last year, they were not very good at defending tight ends. Gave up 130 fantasy points to that position. The Seahawks have an offense that's catered well to tight ends. The Titans are going to be trying to take away those 2-star receivers. That is going to open up opportunities for Everett. And I think he is a matchup problem for the Titans linebackers and safeties. I think Gerald Everett goes for 80 yards, and I think he scores another touchdown for a second consecutive week.
Whew, I like that. I think that both of these could happen. That's the great part about this offense.
We could both click in this one.
We could both be clicking. That's what you want.
Let's go to defense now, because last week you picked, I believe, Jordan Brooks as your pick to click and had a pretty darn good game. So who do you got this week as your pick to click on defense for the Seahawks?
Well, you've heard of coming out parties. There's Russell Wilson, we mentioned, had his one in 2012 with as a rookie. And I love what Samuel Gold of The Athletic said about Darrell Taylor, that he was forklifting the right tackle for the Colts. And it was a beautiful thing to watch, especially that one where he just literally pushes him right over and gets the sack. My pick's Darrell Taylor. Spoiler. I've been high on him since they drafted him. I was really bummed that we didn't get to see him last year. I was really fired up to see him in the preseason, how well he played. And week one, he validated everything. And I think this is a game where he's not going to be going up against Taylor Lewan so much on the other side, but I think that right tackle, David Quisenberry for the Tennessee Titans might be quivering in his boots a little bit, because Darrell Taylor, I think, has the physical gifts to be a very feared pass rusher in this league. And I think this is going to be another game that kind of builds towards him getting that kind of reputation around the league. I'm going to go a sack and a half and a couple tackles for loss too.
I thought about all the defensive linemen the Seahawks have just because of how well their front line played last week. And I easily could have gone with Taylor or Mayowa or Dunlap, but I've got to go with the star free safety, Quandre Diggs, because I have a feeling if the Seahawks front line can do what they did last week and they can be disruptive, they can get to Ryan Tannehill. Even at this stage of his career, Tannehill is still more than capable of trying to thread the needle through multiple defenders or taking shots downfield that he shouldn't be throwing. And if that happens, number 6 is going to be waiting. One of the top ball hawking safeties in the NFL the last 2 years, 8 interceptions the past 2 seasons in just 26 games. He flies all over the field. He takes away those seams and post routes at that free safety position. He truly is an ideal center fielder in Pete Carroll's defense. And so I think when you consider that and the fact they're playing an opponent that's got some receivers, they'll take their shots to downfield, you get some pressure, you force Tannehill into some rough throws, then I can see Quandre Diggs having a big game. And in fact, that's what I'm calling. I think Quandre Diggs gets 8 tackles. He had 9 last week. And I think he gets his first interception this season. And I'm going to go really bold. I think he takes it back for 6.
Yeah, that's right. All right. I like it.
He's due, and we know he's a playmaker.
Ball hawks are going to ball hawk.
Let's talk predictions now real quick. Nick, I had a chance yesterday on our crossover episode to dish out my game prediction. And last week, you and I both picked the Seahawks to win. Do you think Seattle moves to 2-0, or are the Titans going to be thinking upset at Lumen Field?
Well, look, there is no way on God's good green earth that the Seahawks are going to lose their first home game back with fans since 2019. There's just no way they're going to let that happen. They will be juiced, especially on defense, where the crowd is going to be absolutely electric. I have high expectations, 12s. Even if you have masks on, I have high expectations for you to be very loud. And I'm not expecting a blowout. I don't think it's going to be like that. And I actually do have a decently high opinion of the Titans. I think they're going to be in contention in the AFC South. for the most of the year and into December, especially with kind of how weak that division is usually, or it has been the last few years. But there's just too much going Seattle's way right now. They're humming on offense. They're feeling themselves on defense, especially along that defensive line. They have the crowd behind them for the first time in a year and a half or so. I think there's just too much. Everything's coming up Millhouse, you know. I think the Seahawks have too much coming up for them. I'm going to go 30-20 Seahawks. It's not quite a blowout. Maybe it's close late, and the Seahawks get a late touchdown to kind of get the spread into 10 points, and I think the Seahawks do win. But I think it's close, as Lee Corso says, closer than the experts think. But until the end, and the Seahawks pull away very late.
You and I are the same mindset for the most part. I picked 34-24 yesterday, so we're both thinking 10-point victories. So we'll see what happens. I am really excited about this matchup. Again, I've been talking about it all week. Derrick Henry's probably my favorite player that doesn't wear a Seahawks uniform, and I'm a running back guy. And just seeing a 250-pound guy that could run like that with the speed, the long strides, just knocking defenders over left and right, I get fired up watching him play. I like the Titans style, but I think the Seahawks just have a few too many weapons on offense. And quite frankly, I think the Seahawks have a much better defense than what the Titans do. And so while I expect this to be a fairly close game throughout, I think the Seahawks are just going to prove to be too much to handle, particularly, as you said, playing at home with the 12s in the stadium roaring. I just don't see the Seahawks losing this contest. You can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at NickLee51. Make sure to check out Locked On Seahawks on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and the all-new Odyssey app. That's AUDACY. When Rob Rang and I return on Monday, hopefully it's going to be his second straight victory Monday, and we'll be breaking down a Seahawks win over the Titans. We'll also be answering your mailbag questions. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the game. Go Hawks.